This is Words Carry Us. Words Carry Us is an ongoing series of live stream events featuring readings and interviews from Greenkill in Kingston, New York. Tonight, our guest is author, podcaster, and publisher Brent Robison. I'm Betty MacDonald, writer, storyteller, and host of Words Carry Us. Before I introduce our guest, I'll begin the evening reading from my work. This is April is not the cruelest month. April is not the cruelest month. March is. Sad but no longer weeping, I've moved to the other side of grief. Pale ghosts of dead fish under jagged ice. Crow's dark shape silhouetted against whiteness releases fish from its frozen tomb in time for lunch. Peck by peck, she consumes each morsel. Fish becomes bird. Bird takes flight. This is Madeline's. At the memorial for Sandy, I discovered the Madeleines on the long table laden with sweet and savory offerings. They stopped my tears. Greedily, I ate more than my share. I felt it was okay because they stopped my tears. They stopped my tears for now. This is a longer piece. It's called On My Way to Pick Up Milk. On my way to pick up milk before my daughter and her family arrived for a much anticipated reunion to celebrate my eldest granddaughter's 19th birthday. It was the first time we were getting together after more than 12 months of quarantine. I was traveling south on 9W in Highland when I noticed lights flashing from two police cars, not targeting my car, but behind a battered pickup truck pulled into an Exxon station on the other side of the road. A young black woman sat with a toddler on the curb while a young black man standing behind the vehicle spoke to the cop. I caught my breath, remembering a Facebook post I'd read that morning. I'm a 70-year-old white woman aware of what's happening to African Americans in the time of George Floyd, she wrote. The post went on to say, I vow to stop whenever I see the police stop a black person. I will stop. I will witness. I will make myself known. I will make it obvious I'm watching. On my return 10 minutes later, having completed my errand, the truck was still there with cop cars behind it, lights still flashing. The young woman and her baby were back inside the truck. I turned onto the apron of the gas station and pulled in within a few feet of the truck. I've never been an activist. I write letters, I make phone calls, I send donations to fight injustice. But I get too tired to march, and I'm fearful of crowds. Confronting cops is not in my makeup. I wasn't scared, but I was definitely not in my element. Influenced by the post I read on Facebook, I was there to witness and offer what I could. Getting out of my car, I walked up to the window of the truck. Hi, I said. What's happening? I don't have insurance for this vehicle, the young woman answered. I wondered how long they'd been there. Had they eaten? Was the baby hungry? I couldn't bring myself to ask of how I'd be I couldn't bring myself to ask. I was afraid of how I'd be perceived, demanding answers of young people. I wanted to tell them that I know what it's like driving decrepit vehicles without proper registration, without insurance, with little money in my pocket. In the 70s, our rusted out vehicles and unconventional attire alerted the police. They stopped us frequently for routine special checks. I know what it's like feeling alone in hostile territory. Unsure of what to do, I reached in my pocket and pulled out the two $20 bills I'd just gotten from the ATM. I handed them to her. I didn't know what else to do. After a few minutes, the young woman struggling with her phone reached her brother, who was coming from Kingston to pick her up. I wonder if the cops impounded the truck. I hope they got something to eat. I don't speed often, but nowadays when cops stop me for going too fast or not stopping fully at a stoplight or at a stop sign, they tell me to be careful, and they let me go. Assessing my color and my age, they don't give me a ticket. On the one hand, I seem to have old white lady privilege. On the other, I will not be invisible. I will stop. I will witness. I will make myself known. I will make it obvious that I'm watching. And this last one is to my friend on his 73rd birthday. About getting older, I find I just know things. I know things I didn't know before. It's not exactly what I'd call wisdom. Wisdom has such a lofty sound. It's just knowing things. That's just knowing things I've picked up along the way, some from the very air. The more I let go of regret and should-haves, the more this knowing manifests. Brent Robison's fiction has appeared in over a dozen literary journals and several anthologies. His writing has won the Literal Latte Short Award, the Chronogram Short Fiction Contest, a fiction fellowship from the New Jersey Council on the Arts, and a Pushcart Prize. Excuse me, and a Pushcart Prize nomination.
Thank you.
Sorry, Brent. His collection of linked short stories, The Principle of Ultimate Indivisibility, and his mystery novel, Punk Hockey Union, are available from booksellers everywhere. He collaborates with author Tom Newton on The Strange Recital, a podcast about fiction that questions the nature of reality as well as on its offshoot recital publishing. Words Carry Us is delighted to welcome Brent Robison. Hello, Brent.
Hi, Betty. Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So, Punk Hockey Union is the title of your novel. Mm-hmm. And what does it mean?
Well, the title is two words, each with a specific meaning. Pankaki is a word from the Lenni Lenape tribe, the Indian tribe that used to live in this area, and it means dust land or land of ashes. It's also been said to mean something regarding gunpowder or a burial ground. And it is also the name of a neighborhood in Kingston, down by right along the Hudson River. And Union, in this case, refers to an ancient Indian spiritual philosophy of non-duality or oneness, but it also refers to the Pankaki Union Congregational Church, which is in the Pankaki neighborhood where much of the book takes place. So that's the title.
Wow. And that's that big church as you come into Pankaki, right?
No, it's a small church and a very interesting looking church, which is kind of hidden away. Well, it depends on where you mean when you say come into Pankaki.
I couldn't possibly tell you.
Yeah, I think of it as kind of hidden away on Broyne Street. Yeah.
And can you tell us something of the story?
Sure. I'll show you the cover here. There's a big eyeball looking out through a hole, and I think we'll get a little more insight into that in a moment. But the story is about a documentary filmmaker. His name is Ben Rose. He has a wife, Kate, and a little daughter, Ava. He lives in Jersey City, but he's doing preliminary research on a documentary series that he's going to do about the Revolutionary War. And that brings him to Kingston to investigate the burning of Kingston. And as part of that exploration of Kingston, he gets accidentally entangled with a 40-year-old conspiracy involving international assassins, and the whole thing derails his life. He ends up being held prisoner in a tiny, dark, concrete cell for 2 weeks. He has to put his life back together after that, and the story it has murder, it has seduction, it has divorce, but it's mostly the internal journey of a man whose life falls apart and comes back together.
And then we find ourselves in the Utah desert and the Middle East and India also.
Yeah, well, I have a lot of aesthetic pleasure out of the contrast between the deserts of Utah and the green hills of our area here. But it's also because I know those two areas very well, and I'm inspired to write about them. So I have a past in Utah and a present here in New York, and then the Middle East and India are part of the story being told by a mercenary soldier who becomes if you can believe it, becomes a devotee of the Indian guru Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, and he's a big part of the story as well.
So there's a lot of local history in this story. Is that something you're particularly interested in?
It is, yes. I enjoy learning about history. In particular, I like the non-traditional looks at history, the small, quirky, odd details that personalize history and take it out of the textbooks. And I like the questions that come up. We know that history is written by the victors, and that could mean that very little actual truth is being told. What we've been taught in school may not at all be what the experienced history was at the time. And that idea of challenging conventional truths is important to me. It's consistent throughout the book.
So do you know things about Kingston the rest of us don't know?
Well, I don't know what the rest of you know, but I learned a lot as I studied this. I really enjoyed the learning about the burning of Kingston and the things that led to that, and the surrender at Saratoga, which is north of here, an important battle in the war. Mm-hmm. But the story is not this is not historical fiction. It's a very contemporary story. It actually takes place in the present day of 2015, and then goes back into 1995, and then another 20 years back into 1975. So the history is more like just an informing way. It helps us learn about the characters.
Right. And one of your key characters has the name of a famous writer, Paul Auster. Why did you do that? Why did you get his permission? That was one thing I needed to know.
Well, no, I did not get his permission, and I don't really need his permission. He's a public figure.
Oh.
And I'm not saying anything about him that's derogatory in any way. He's a very important good guy in the story. But let me tell you a little bit about why I did that.
Okay.
I really respect his work. It's influenced me a lot. His novels deal with a lot of the time. They deal with coincidence and chance, the impact that chance has on people's lives, and what happens when people are taken to their limits, and what they do with that. And so partly I wanted to write an homage to Paul Auster, and that's what this novel partly is. But there's another aspect to it which is fascinating for me, and that is that putting the name of a real person and sort of asking the question, who might Paul Auster be if he had never had publishing success? He would be a completely different person. And as the reader encounters an actual real person, they are asking inside themselves, what's true and what isn't true? So this is a metafictional gimmick, you might say, which is the kind of thing I like in fiction. It ties into philosophy that I have that kind of rejects the common cliche about writing, which is that a story should envelop the reader so thoroughly that they never give thought to the author at all. Well, I don't subscribe to that, because my engagement with any art gets a great deal of aesthetic pleasure out of actually seeing the painter's brush marks and knowing their style and that sort of thing. So
I tend to agree with you.
I want metafiction, I want my fiction to be metafiction, so that it's fiction about fiction, in a sense. The people are aware that they're reading a story, and appreciating the little games being played by the author. I enjoy that.
Right. So the novel is fiction, of course, but is it also autobiographical?
Well, it is. It's my theory that that anything anybody ever writes is a self-portrait. It can't be otherwise. So in general, yes. I mean, I enjoy that blurry line. If I haven't, I've already said it. I enjoy the blurry line between truth and lies, or between fiction and memoir, and so I'm playing with that. But at the same time, there are autobiographical details, like any writer does. They're pulling from their own life in various subtle ways. For instance, I use the description of my first drive, the first time I ever drove into the neighborhood of punk hockey when I barely knew Kingston at all back in the mid-90s, early 90s. And first time I ever drove into punk hockey, it made a distinct impression on me. So I pulled from that for this character when he first drives into punk hockey. Yeah.
Could you give us a taste of the novel? Could you read something?
Absolutely. Okay. Well, actually, the first thing I want to do very quickly is just in the nature of an experiment in the spirit of poetry. I've never done this before, but I was thinking all my chapter headings are one-word chapters. It's divided. The book is divided into 4 sections. So I'm going to read my chapter headings in the as if maybe they could be a poem. I don't know. You tell me. Part 1. Pasts arising. Today. Heat. Legacy. Punk hockey. Kingston. Cross. Done. Home. History. Battlefield. Chance. Church. Part 2. Meantime. Hugh. Kate. Paul. Part 3. Camera obscura. Darkness. Lester. Breathe. Void. Desert. Cinema. Union. Confrontation. Freedom. Part 4. In the not knowing. Cabin. Plot. Change. Camp. Fire. Fall. Millennium. Today. So it's a circular construction. It starts and ends with today. Now let me just read. This is an excerpt from chapter 1.
Okay.
Excuse me. Yesterday and today, suddenly my past has invaded my present. Yesterday afternoon, October 16th, while my wife was working, I sat at home looking through old videotapes from over 20 years ago. My 10-year-old daughter, Chandra, is into roller skating, and I wanted to show her the skate dancers in Central Park that I had shot on video in the early 90s. I dug out my ancient Sony 8mm Handycam and shuffled through a box of poorly labeled tapes, viewing the footage on the camera's little fold-out screen. After several tries, I found a tape marked August 94 Park and fast-forwarded it until I saw skating footage. Tinny disco music blared out of the miniature speaker as I watched the graceful, funky dancers skating in circles. It's interesting what time will do. I had no memory of being the eye behind that camera, as if someone else had shot this scene. I watched as the camera panned across the crowd of tourists and gawkers. Then a gesture caught my eye. The flutter of a hand, a left hand wiping sweat from a brow, a flick of wrist, an angle of elbow, a moment gone. It echoed a memory, long repressed, of an inexplicable disaster, a wrenching turn in my path. I immediately stopped the playback and rewound the tape, back to where I'd seen the gesture. Yes, there he was. A man whose face was so bland it was easy to overlook, almost invisible. It was a face that had gradually dissolved into a blur in my memory, out of reach. But now, here it was again. The face of a man I once called double naught, as in no, none, a negation. A man like a black hole who shed no light. 2 decades had passed since I saw that face. I had hoped to never see it again. I spent the next hour looking with care through the rest of that tape and another one from the same summer. I kept my focus always on the background, the blur of passing strangers, that New York City human atmosphere that becomes almost invisible. I glimpsed him 2 more times, once at Bethesda Fountain and again on Central Park West. Gradually, the revelation dawned. He had been following me. Even then, a full year before we met, before the events tumbled down on my head like a building collapsing, he had been there, watching me, planning. The old familiar dread, gone for so long now, crept again up my spine. Is he still watching me, even now, waiting to swoop down and destroy? That discovery itself was unsettling enough, but there was also the fact of today's date, a date inextricably connected to the man on the tape. A truly odd coincidence, except that I don't believe in mere coincidence. And then my questions were intensified even more by what happened this morning. Around 10 a.m., my journalist friend Paul called and asked me to meet him at the mortuary in Woodstock and to be prepared to view a corpse. He wouldn't say more. I left immediately and drove the 5 miles into town, dreading what might be in store. Paul and I had met in the 90s during that same difficult period that was already nagging at my mind. Even though we still see each other occasionally, I had the inexplicable sense that his call was related to those long ago times. October 16th and 17th, the dates of the burning of Kingston and the surrender at Saratoga during the Revolutionary War, dates that once ruled all my thoughts that summer 20 years ago when I was so irrationally immersed in that little slice of American history. The year of change, the year that marked the end of oneself, the beginning of another. In the chilly prep room of Lasher Funeral Home, the mortician pulled back a sheet, and I saw an elderly man with long, tangled gray hair and beard. For a moment I was blank. Then I recognized him. This was a man who wandered the streets of Woodstock, silent but often smiling. His sole occupation seemed to be painting graceful Sanskrit symbols. Om and Om Mani Padme Hum on rocks, boards, driftwood, then giving the pieces away to whomever took his fancy. He had given more than one to my wife. They decorate our front porch and a couple of windowsills, and she had told me he was very sweet to her. Among the several eccentric street folk of Woodstock, he was the most lovable. His death from a heart attack was a sad event for our town, yes, but I never knew his name or where he lived and had never had any direct contact with him. Why was Paul showing me his body? I have an answer, but the answer requires a long, convoluted tale, especially in light of what I found yesterday afternoon. Synchronicity carries meaning. Yesterday, the man on tape, today, the dead man. The two of them forever connected in a long past mystery, unsolved. I'll never know the whole truth, but now I can't help it. I have to look back. Two specters from my past suddenly here again on these dates. I have to go over the story once more, as if maybe this time it will make sense.
What would you say are the main themes you're exploring in the book?
Well, I call this a mystery novel, but it's really not so much a whodunit as a who am I. So there are several themes, and one is identity. The main character, his name is Ben Rose, but his full name is Benedict Arnold Rose, named after the worst traitor in American history, and he's dealing with that legacy and asking, who am I? And he's also having to deal with wondering whether the end of his marriage is his own fault. And then connected to identity is a personal growth theme. He goes through the slow process of changing who he is. Mm-hmm. Another theme has to do with the ancient Indian spiritual philosophy of Advaita, non-duality or oneness. The strange part of it is that in the story, when he's a prisoner, he actually gets indoctrinated against his will with this philosophy, but it turns out to actually help him. There's also, it toys with the idea of the theory of multiple universes. We sort of learn at the end that maybe this is not exactly the world we live in. But there's really one main theme, and that is the question, what is reality? And the fact that we cannot answer that question in the deepest sense. So the great mystery, how the world works with all its strange synchronicities and inexplicable events that occur and the meanings that we take from the things that happen in our lives, and the beauty of creation, and all of the things that at a deeper level than science we can't answer, and the inspiration I take from that mystery, that's really what this book is about.
Wow. Can you read some more to us?
Sure. Let's see here. This is a scene where Ben Rose has visited Kingston. He's explored a little bit. He briefly met the caretaker of the Ponkhockey Congregational Church, and something about that guy struck him. And during the next few days, he's thinking about it, and he casts back into his memory, and he thinks he remembers this guy from 20 years earlier. So he decides to go back to Kingston and do a little more research and visit him. So this is when he gets back into Ponkhockey. Over on Ebroin Street, I parked across the street from the church and walked in through the double front doors and down the central aisle of the chapel. As churches go, it was not big, and the interior seemed even smaller than I expected. The light was dim, the air distinctly cooler. There was a slightly musty smell, the odor of age. The church seemed empty, but then I heard a voice echo. "Welcome. How are you today?" I stopped and looked around. I didn't know where the sound was coming from. Then he emerged from behind a screen near the front of the chapel, walking toward me, grinning. "Hello, hello, hello. I'm the caretaker of the church, Lester Sponda." He reached out his hand to shake mine. Just as before, there was a twinkle in his eye as if he were enjoying a private joke. "Please, call me Les. Ha ha." "Hi," I said. "I was here a few days ago and decided to come back and take you up on your offer of a tour." I had decided to play it cool, not mention the O'Briens, just scope him out. "Yes, I remember you. So glad you returned. Well, sir, let's start right here, shall we?" He opened both arms and looked toward the ceiling as if to indicate the whole world. "The Ponkhockey Union Congregational Church is the oldest reinforced concrete structure in the state of New York. That means it was at the forefront of a revolution in construction techniques that changed the look of cities all over the world. In fact, right here in the Rondout, the Newark Lime and Cement Company had a thriving business, and in 1870 they built this church as a Sunday school for the workers' families. Not exactly the way business operates today, eh?" I was not really paying much attention. I was focused on him, comparing this man in front of me to my memories, dim though they were. "The church is built of poured concrete made from locally mined natural cement and crushed bluestone aggregate. The structure incorporates iron reinforcing rods and plates in its buttresses and an ingenious cold air conditioning system inside the walls." He went on, but after a few minutes I stopped him. "Actually, I think I get the picture about the church, and thank you. You're a very good tour guide," I said. For a moment he looked disappointed to be interrupted. "Thank you, and I want to ask you something," I said. "I have a very strong impression that you and I have met before." "Really?" he said. "Here at the church?" "No," I said. "Way back in the 70s, in the desert, in Utah." I was almost certain I saw a shade flicker across his face, but he covered it very well with a chuckle and a shake of the head. "Oh, I don't think so. I'm from England. Been here in Kingston for over 10 years, working here in the church. I've actually never been out west." I really was not 100% positive. How could I be? I said, "Well, I guess I could be mistaken, but you have a very strong resemblance to a man I knew as Jack Dunn." "You know, sir, I think the world is full of mysteries. Perhaps we all have a doppelganger somewhere, but my name is actually Lester Sponda." He kept moving, and I followed. Why was he so cheery? "I'm less every day. Ha ha, closer and closer to zero." Now he's making no sense at all, I thought. Maybe he's nervous. Maybe he's lying. Or, more likely, my imagination is on overdrive. He said, "Shall we continue our tour?" I thought, what can it hurt? So I said yes, and he made a polite after you gesture as he said, "Over here behind the altar, let me show you a truly unique feature of the construction of this building." I moved in front of him, took a few steps, and felt a gentle touch at the base of my neck, then nothingness.
Well, that's intriguing, isn't it?
I hope so.
So are you working on something new now?
I am. I have a novel in progress, which I don't have a title for yet, although I've been working on it for many years. And it's basically an exploration into the nature of authorship and the mysterious way that sometimes we don't know where our writing actually comes from, and other strangenesses and questions into reality and synchronicities in some way similar to this book. I'm also working on a short story collection, which is mostly made up of stories that have appeared on the Strange Recital podcast, but also some other stories as well. And so both of those are going on. I'm not sure which one is going to get done first. We'll see.
Talk about your podcast.
Well, the Strange Recital podcast is a collaboration between myself and Tom Newton, another writer, and we chose the tagline, "A podcast about fiction that questions the nature of reality," because this is our interest. And we feature authors reading their own work when possible, short stories or novel excerpts, and we do author interviews with them, and we release an episode twice a month. And out of the podcast, that's been going on for almost 5 years now. Out of the podcast came our publishing company, Recital Publishing, and we're a new startup, but it's going well. We have half a dozen books that we're offering at this point, and more planned.
How new is it? How long we've been publishing?
We started in 2019, so it's
So it's quite
not,
new.
yeah, it's not quite 2 years yet.
Right. Do we count this last year in any way?
Yeah, well, we did manage to put out 2 books this past year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Anybody got anything done this year? My
Yeah.
hat's off to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Who are your greatest influencers as a writer?
Well, as I mentioned, Oster is a big one. Another one is Nabokov. I love his work.
Yes.
Kafka. A really favorite book of mine, which we're just about to feature on our podcast, I think it'll be out in a week or so, is David Markson. His novel Wittgenstein's Mistress is one of my favorite books. Yeah, so that's a few of them.
And where can one find the podcast?
The podcast is at thestrangerecital.com, and also any podcast platform that you choose to use. If you search The Strange Recital, you should find it.
Okay.
Yeah, and the publishing company is at recitalpublishing.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. How do you juggle all that? podcast publishing and writing a novel and short stories?
Well, I actually, yeah, it's a bit of a challenge. I also have a part-time, three-quarter time day job too, and a wife and a child in the home. So, you know, it's
That's
I don't
enough
get
for
a,
most people.
yeah, I don't get a lot of writing done, unfortunately, at this point in time.
Right.
I need to carve out some more time for writing, because I'm not a disciplined writer. I tend to let these things with deadlines and tasks, the to-do list, kind of take over, and that's unfortunate. That needs to change. But yeah, it's a juggling act always.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
life is, isn't
Yeah.
it? A juggling act.
Yeah.
Did you always want to be a writer in your life?
Well,
When you were a
I
child?
did. I read so much as a child, and yes, I found I wanted to be a writer, and through junior high and high school, I wrote quite a lot. I wrote poetry, I wrote short stories, but then once I got out of high school, my interests moved towards filmmaking, and I was a video producer for a long career. But then, after realizing that that was a more collaborative art than I felt comfortable with, I turned back to writing fiction, and that's when I slowly got through the collection of short stories that I published back in 2009, and then worked on this and the other novels.
And say the
since.
name of that short story collection.
The Principle of Ultimate Indivisibility.
Right. And where are your books sold?
Well, the recitalpublishing.com site offers several options for where to buy Punk Hockey Union. We believe in supporting local bookstores, so we urge indie-bound or bookshop or order directly from your local bookstore, but it's also available at Amazon and other online retailers, and the same with the Principle of Ultimate Indivisibility, online, available online, and can be ordered from bookstores as well.
Great.
Yeah.
Do you feel like reading to us a little more?
Yes. I mentioned that the protagonist ends up a prisoner in a dark little cell, and has been indoctrinated with an entirely foreign way of thinking in regard to meditation and journeying inward by a guy who he's been taught this sort of without any choice by a guy who seems like a terrible, cruel person, but maybe he isn't. It's a question that arises. And so I'm going to read from a section that is towards the end of his time in that cell, and it's just before he gets out and finds his way into a hiding place out in the woods near Phoenicia, and then eventually puts his life back together. This is the chapter called Union. Darkness, cheek on cold concrete, Sponda nowhere near, but voice echoing. Ben, Maharaj told us there is no need of a way out. Don't you see that a way out is also a part of the dream? All you have to do is to see the dream as dream. Kate and Ava, a movie I once saw long ago. Movies are dreams. Kate and Ava, a movie that I failed to finish. I tried to make it but lost my way. Forgot how, in a dream. My most important work, all ashes in my hands. I betrayed them, failure that I am. Now they are ripped from me. My body has 2 bleeding wounds, one adult size under the right arm, the other child size under the left. I may die of this. Instead, I sleep. My hip and shoulder hurt. I struggle up to consciousness, breathe and stretch, and meditate as I have learned. I sleep and dream. Inside my chest is a wide-open sky at dusk filled with a murmuration of cliff swallows, thousands in synchronous flow, rippling across the liquid blue in huge sweeps, folds, up-twisting arabesques, and a sound like rushing waters, far then near, then far. Time. No hours or minutes or seconds, just time, a boundless solid. Then nothing but darkness, and sometimes his voice. He speaks kindly, so much repetition. You are not in the world, he says. The world is in you. Then silence. Blind, I grasp for images. Image as in imagination, or is it memory? A photo album, pictures of myself as an infant. There is one, black and white, in which I am in the arms of my smiling young father, and I gaze wide-eyed at the camera. Now, in my black cell, I imagine holding that little baby, my own beginning self, looking into his eyes, making a connection. I invite him to join me, and as I hug him to my chest, I feel a burst of warmth as he dissolves into me. Then I recall another in which I must have been 3, squinting in sunshine, wearing a New York Yankees outfit with cap and tiny glove. I do the same, making eye contact, inviting him to join me, hugging that little me with love until he vanishes into my chest. I don't know how long I spend doing this, but I work my way up through every stage of my life. Rowdy young boy, insecure teen, earnest young adult, busy grown man, husband and father, acknowledging each earlier me, bringing him with love into the me of today. Then I go further. I imagine myself in the future, aged 50, 60, 70, 80, a very old man, body bowed but healthy, each time looking this imagined self in the eyes and hugging him into light and air inside my chest. Then I see myself on my deathbed, wrinkled and frail, eyes closed, an ancient being breathing his final breaths. I visualize gathering this rickety assemblage of skin and bones into my arms, absorbing my own dying self in a wave of pure acceptance. And then I go further yet. I imagine my dead body, the face a still mask, the flesh inert as a log, buried in earth, eaten by worms, rotting, breaking down, crumbling into unrecognizability, becoming soil. And I see this as it, he, I, disappears forever. The witness still remains. Now I am moving through a desert, but it is not a real desert. It is a movie, but the cinematographer has overexposed the film. Everything is burnt out to vivid white, no shadows. Cliffs and spires, insubstantial as light through clear celluloid, tower into a blazing white sky. The soundtrack is not silence, it is the absence, or perhaps presence, of all sound. Walls merge into skyscrapers, a city canyon, snow-bleached, blinding glare on glass. There is no sun. The sun is everywhere, but without heat or dryness. The ground is air. I have no feet. I am only eyes, squinting against the brightness as I travel. Everything is in slow motion, an infinitely varied landscape, cityscape, unfolding in oceans of brilliance, ever changing, ever the same. After a time that is long and short, I understand that, in fact, I am not eyes. Eyes cannot see themselves. The witness and the witnessed are one. There can be no I that is separate from this desert, this city, this motion, this light. There is only current experience, all enveloping. There is only what is, arising in awareness.
So you have a lot on your plate, and I'm wondering what's the most fulfilling things that you do, your writing, publishing, podcasting career. What does it, do you just bounce from one to the other? Are they all fulfilling the same amount?
Well, no. The most fulfilling thing is actually writing fiction for me.
Yes, yeah.
As far as my artistic efforts go. I mean, you know, I'm a husband and father first.
Yeah,
But and you know, nothing comes before that. But as far as my creative work, the podcast and the publishing are secondary in terms of the fulfillment I get.
right.
There's a great feeling when you finish a book. You know,
Oh,
you
yeah.
write the end and well, then you go back through it and rework it. But finally, when you get to that point where you can say, I am satisfied with this, and this is my child, it's going to go out into the world and have its own life, that's a
It's-
great feeling. Yeah,
There's nothing like that.
Yeah.
Right. That's terrific.
yeah.
So in this difficult year, at least it's been difficult for me, but interesting, how has COVID affected your art, your life, or your work?
Well, unfortunately, COVID and all the surrounding madness has definitely blocked me. So in one way, the podcast and the publishing has been a way to keep my hand in to creative tasks, but my writing I've struggled with that. I've done little tiny bits here and there, and I can't I haven't been able, I shouldn't say can't, I haven't been able to keep my attention on it, but I feel that it's going to get better. You know, now that a year of this has passed, I'm finding a way to fit it in, and who knows how the events of the year will change the work that's in progress. I don't know, because this has all been such a huge surprise and shock, and can I continue on the story arc that I was working on?
Right.
I don't know. You know, will it change it? In a way, I don't want that story arc to change, because I want to have a place to go that is not current events related. So we'll see. But you know, I'm taking it bit by bit.
Right, and it's not over yet.
Definitely not. It may never be. So
There could be too,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Then we'll all adjust in a different way.
we'll adjust.
Brent, this has been really interesting. I've really enjoyed speaking with you. Your reading is terrific.
Thank you.
I have read the book, and now I want to read it again.
Good.
It's been a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much, Betty. Glad to be here.
Located at 229 Greenkill Avenue in Kingston, New York, Greenkill is a public arts performance and education space. Next month, March 16th, our guest will be Tom Newton, a colleague of our present guest, Brent, who is the author of a recently released book, Voyages to Nowhere, and he's also wrote the short story collection, 7 Cries of Delight. Works by Christine Hughes, Jerry Order, Scott Michael Ackerman will be on exhibition at Greenkill next month. The opening party is next Saturday, May 1st, from May 1st from 5 to 7 p.m. The exhibition runs from Saturday, May 1st to Saturday, May 29th. Exhibition hours are 3 to 5:30 p.m., Tuesday through Saturday. For information about exhibitions and live stream events, check out Greenkill on Facebook or email us at 229greenkill@greenkill.org. We're grateful to David Shell, who organizes, directs, and makes things happen here at Greenkill. And thanks to you for tuning in and finding us on YouTube. Again, special thanks to our guest tonight, author, podcaster, and publisher, Brent Robison. I hope you've enjoyed Words Carry Us for April 25th, 2021. I am your host, Betty MacDonald.